The war in Ukraine, which many expected to last months at worst, is closing in on its third year. Putin's unprovoked aggression persists. The end of this brutal war is not in sight. Russia has recaptured the strategic momentum on the battlefield, fighting to negate all Ukrainian gains from its summer counteroffensive and capture more land, while Ukraine is defending hard and planning its next moves. In this video, we will talk about the events from the second half of December and briefly touch upon the main outcomes of the war in 2023. Per usual, let's start with the description of the situation on the battlefield. Heavy fighting continues in the Avdiivka sector. The Russians have not been able to achieve a breakthrough in this period either, but still managed some gains. On December 21st, it was reported that the Armed Forces of Ukraine, AFU, withdrew from Stepova towards Berdichi, but they later counterattacked and regained some of the lost positions in the west of the village. The Russian army also expanded their area of control to the north towards Novokalinovka and Bakhmutivka, and to the south towards Siviena. The situation is not yet critical for the Ukrainian army, as they're generally holding their ground and regularly destroying large amounts of Russian armor. But quite clearly, the capture of Avdiivka is Putin's next big goal, and the Russian army will not stop until they have captured it or have lost their offensive potential, knocking their heads against this highly fortified town. General Zaluzhny has already warned about this possibility, stating that Russia can repeat what happened in Bakhmut in Avdiivka and capture this town in the next couple of months. Elsewhere in Donbass, elements of the 20th Motor Rifle Division have developed their progress in and around Mariinka. We have already reported that they are in control of most of Mariinka except the very northwestern edge of this town, and the capture of this town has allowed them to reach the village of Mariinka and advance between Pobeda and Novomikhailivka. The Russians are currently targeting a Ukrainian stronghold on elevated land between these two towns, and its capture will give the Russian army an advantageous position against Ukrainian positions in the flatlands to the west. In the Bakhmut sector, the Russians continued to regain previously lost positions. In the second half of December, the Russian army captured ground northwest and southwest of Bakhmut and made advances northwest of Klishchiivka, while the AFU advanced towards a water reservoir north of Avdiivka. Lastly, on December 29th, some sources claimed that the Russian army reportedly captured Sperna, another town which has been a battlefield for more than a year, but this remains unconfirmed at the time of writing. On the North Luhansk front, the Russians are still attacking Sinkivka, but the Ukrainians continue destroying all the equipment thrown at them in this town. The most notable advance of the Russian army on this front was the capture of some land east of Yampolivka. But this front remains the most problematic for the Russians, as they have not achieved any meaningful advance there since the summer. However, the tide is seemingly turning on the Zaporizhia front, where the Ukrainian army has significantly decreased their offensive operations. Moreover, on December 27th, the Ukrainian units around the Robotyne salient withdrew to more defensively advantageous positions, losing areas around Verbova and Novopokropivka to the Russians. Control over this salient makes sense as a component of further offensive operations. Earlier in the counteroffensive, the liberation of Robotyne meant that the AFU had managed to create a wedge in the Russian defenses, but later failed to take advantage of this. For months, there has been a stalemate in this salient, but since Ukrainian positions were surrounded on three sides by the Russians, they were vulnerable to attacks and shelling. The end of the Ukrainian offensive operations on the Zaporizhia front means that it does not make much sense to hold this ground, taking unnecessary losses. Ultimately, the AFU may have to withdraw from Robotyne too, but as of late December, this decision has not been made. The situation in the Krinky bridgehead has not changed much. The Ukrainian naval infantry is trying to expand their area of control, but has so far been unable to do that due to heavy Russian bombing, shelling and drone use. The Ukrainians rely on speedboats for rotation and resupply, which is a very difficult task as they have to conduct these operations under regular Russian strikes and shelling. According to the New York Times article quoting Ukrainian soldiers fighting in this sector, they are fighting in brutal conditions, which are worse than in Bakhmut or Soledar, another sector of the battlefield infamous for very heavy fighting and casualties. Some even called it a suicide mission. But the Russians are suffering from heavy losses too, and have brought elements of the 7th VDV division to defend the left bank of the Dnipro. Ukrainian artillery has an advantage of standing on a higher elevation on the right bank, and regularly inflicting heavy casualties on the Russians. It is notable that in a video, a Ukrainian drone operator with the call sign Madhyar, who is currently fighting in this sector, has criticized the New York Times article for being manipulative or telling only half the story. Magyar claimed that the fighting in Krinky has decimated the 104th VDV Division and the 810th Naval Infantry Brigade of Russia, implying that the Ukrainian strategy in this sector is sound and that they should persist in their actions there. On December 22nd, the Ukrainian air defences downed 3 Su-34 jets in this sector. Analysts assess that these jets were used to launch FAB-500 bombs from a distance of some 50 kilometers to destroy Ukrainian positions in Krinky. The Ukrainian command did not specify the method with which they destroyed the Su-34s, but it was most probably done by PAC-2 air defense missiles from Patriot systems. Until then, the Ukrainians did not have anything to oppose FAB-500 glide bombs, which were causing serious damage for their soldiers in Krinky. But now the Russian command must think twice before deploying their jets to launch them. The Ukrainian command has already reported the decreased Russian Air Force activity near Krinky, while the Russian sources acknowledged the loss of only 1 Su-34. The Ukrainian Air Force also later claimed the downing of another Su-34 over Mariupol and an Su-30 jet over the Black Sea on December 24th. The Russians have retaliated by striking a train station in Kherson. In this period, Ukraine also continued targeting Russian naval assets in the Black Sea. On December 26th, Ukraine destroyed the Rapucha-class landing ship Novichokazk and significantly damaged the port housing it. Some sources claim that the Novichokazk may have been carrying artillery shells, and their detonation may have set off MLRS missiles, causing the huge explosion caught by phone cameras. Regardless, the Russian Black Sea Fleet is getting weaker by the day, and will likely not play an important role in the coming months. How can we describe the battlefield developments in Ukraine in 2023? In a nutshell, neither side has achieved any decisive war-winning breakthrough. The Russian army and its now deceased Wagner PMC grinded through the Ukrainian defences in the first half of 2023 to capture Bakhmut and the towns surrounding it, but this effort has weakened the Russian offensive potential in the sector so much that the Russian units were unable to continue their offensive and attack Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, the next key targets in Donbass. Ukraine's much-anticipated summer counter-offensive, which targeted the land bridge between Russia and Crimea, also fell way short of Kyiv's expectations. Lacking air superiority, the Ukrainian brigades were stopped by a vast network of minefields, fortifications and trenches on the Zaporizhia front, which allowed them to make only minor gains. Their progress in the Bakhmut sector was modest as well, and to make matters worse, the Russians have recently been recapturing ground earlier liberated by Ukraine. By autumn, Russia regained the strategic momentum on the battlefield, targeting the capture of the Avdiivka fortress and pushing the Ukrainians behind the river Oskil on the North Luhansk front. The Russian army has made only limited gains in and around Avdiivka, despite losing hundreds of vehicles in this battle already. Their success in North Luhansk has been even more limited. Overall, battles in 2023 have caused a lot of blood and casualties, but have not changed the situation on the ground significantly. Russia has been expected to restart the winter bombardment of Ukraine at some point. Throughout December, the Russians regularly launched dozens of drones and an occasional missile almost every day, but these attacks were not too problematic for the Ukrainian air defences. On the other hand, these strikes may have served the purpose of detecting the Ukrainian air defence. On December 29th, Russia launched 36 Shahed drones and more than 120 missiles, including Kh missiles, Iskander ballistic missiles, S-300 and S-400 missiles and Kinjal hypersonic missiles, among others. The Ukrainian Air Force commander, Mykola Oleshchuk, dubbed it the most massive attack from the air since the start of the war. Kyiv, Kharkiv, Lviv, Dnipro, Zaporizhia and Odessa cities, and Sumy, Cherkasy and Mykolaiv oblasts were targeted in this bombardment. The Ukrainian air defense reported the downing of 27 Shaheds and 88 missiles, but it was not enough to prevent major destruction in Ukrainian urban areas. But along with residential buildings, schools, shopping malls and other civilian areas, Russians have also reportedly targeted Ukraine's industrial facilities, some of which may have been manufacturing military equipment. It is difficult to know this for sure at this point, but if Russia has indeed struck Ukrainian weapon production facilities, it may be problematic for Kyiv, since it has lately started to rely more on local arms production to compensate for the lack of Western military deliveries in recent months. On the following day, Ukraine retaliated by striking Bryansk, Oryol, Kursk and Moscow Oblast with drones and missiles, to which Russia responded by attacking Kharkiv and other cities with Shahed drones and 6 S-300 missiles. On January 2nd, Russia attacked Kyiv and Kharkiv once more, we can say that the Russian winter bombardment campaign has really started now. The curious note is that so far, we have not seen many reports about the targeting of Ukrainian energy infrastructure, which was the case in the previous bombardment campaign. There have been reports of temporary energy disruption in some buildings and facilities in Kyiv, but nowhere near the level of late 2022 yet. The war in public discussion in Ukraine was dominated by mobilization. For several weeks, the Ukrainian high-ranking officials, including military commanders, spoke about the necessity of conducting further mobilization efforts. Evidently, the AFU is experiencing manpower shortages, which can only be solved by mobilization. In this period, both the Chief of Military Intelligence, Budanov, and the Commander-in-Chief, Zaluzhny, spoke about the necessity of mobilization. Budanov complained of the effectiveness and morale of the mobilized, but noted there is no alternative to them, since the Ukrainian army needs to maintain a number of 1.1 million soldiers. General Major Marchenko said that Ukraine does not have any more people who would volunteer to enlist, since most of them had already joined the army, and called on the Ukrainians to mobilize, because if we don't finish this war, we don't have another chance. Zaluzhny stated that the effectiveness of mobilization dropped after the dismissal of previous heads of military conscription offices, who were criticized in Ukraine for their harsh methods and corruption, but who, according to Zaluzhny, were professionals who knew how to do it. The General Staff recommended mobilizing up to 500,000 new soldiers to enable the creation of new brigades and maintain the existing brigades. Several officials and politicians proposed the mobilization of Ukrainian men who left the country when the invasion started. Finally, on December 25th, the Cabinet of Ministers proposed legislation on mobilization which would lower the mobilization age from 27 to 25, allow the discharge of servicemen after they serve for 36 months, barring a crisis on the battlefield, and rotation every 6 months. This legislation is not universally accepted in the Ukrainian public, and as of early January, the debates are still ongoing. But statements of Ukrainian officials clearly demonstrate that the AFU needs more men to continue fighting the Russian invasion. Ukrainian domestic military production also continues to increase against the background of problems with foreign military aid. On December 16th, it was reported that the AFU received its first batch of AQ-400 Scythe UAVs, capable of carrying payloads of up to 32 kilograms with a range of 750 kilometers. At this point, Ukraine can produce 100 of these drones per month, but aim to increase the manufacturing to 500 monthly. Ukraine has also started producing Cobra drones, the cost of which is merely $2,000. It has a payload of 15 kilograms and a range of 300 kilometers. The Minister of Strategic Industries, Kamyshin, stated that Ukraine produced 50,000 FPV drones in December, and is already capable of producing more than 10,000 strike drones with a range of a few hundred kilometers and thousands of drones with a range higher than 1,000 kilometers. Zelensky has already vowed that Ukraine will produce 1 million drones in 2024. It is an ambitious plan, and we will see if it is realistic quite soon. Kamyshin also added that Ukraine is working on manufacturing hybrid air defense systems called Frankensam, which will combine Soviet air defense launchers with Western air defense missiles. Kyiv's allies are also working to help Ukraine ramp up its domestic military production. We earlier reported about the British BAE Systems agreeing to build a facility in Ukraine for repair and maintenance of the British artillery systems, and on December 18th this was made official. In this period, several countries have also made pledges of military aid to Ukraine. On December 19th, Germany announced that Rheinmetall and an unnamed French company will produce artillery shells worth some $400 million for Ukraine. On December 21st, Finland announced a military aid package worth 106 million euros. On December 22nd, the Dutch Prime Minister Rutte confirmed that the Netherlands is preparing 18 F-16 fighters to be donated to Ukraine. It is unclear when the Ukrainian Air Force will actually start using them, since the date of completion of their training is not known. On the same day, the White House announced that the US will receive Patriot missiles from Japan, which will undoubtedly later be sent to Ukraine. It has also been reported that Britain is working on a similar deal regarding Japan-manufactured 155mm artillery shells. On December 27th, US State Secretary Blinken stated that Ukraine will receive a military aid package worth $250 million, consisting of additional air defense missiles for NASAMS, more ammunition for HIMARS, 105mm and 155mm artillery shells, javelins, 84s and Stingers, and so on. The United States government has almost run out of money dedicated to military aid in Ukraine, and Kyiv will be hoping that once Congress is back from recess, it will agree to allocate additional funds for support to Ukraine in 2024. Following the bombardment of Ukrainian cities, the British Defence Minister Shapps stated that the UK would send up to 200 air defence missiles to Ukraine. Lastly, on January 1st, Norway announced that it will allow its domestic military producers to sell military equipment directly to Ukraine, a marked departure of a long-standing Norwegian policy of refusal to sell arms to warring sides.